Mary sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the single candle flickering against the rough-hewn walls of her cabin. The room was silent, save for the occasional creak of the timber as the wind pressed against it. Her husband's boots still rested. By the door, worn and covered in dust, though no one would ever walk in them again. Sometimes she thought of moving them, but each time she tried, her hands faltered. It felt as though removing them would erase him completely, and she could not bear another loss, not when her life already felt so stripped bare. It had been 2 years since his passing. He had been a good man, strong and steady, who worked hard to build their little home on the edge of town. But a fever came suddenly one winter, and within days he was gone. Mary had nursed him until the end, whispering prayers through her tears. But no prayer could hold back death. Since then, her world had been quieter than any heart could bear. Her days followed a rhythm that kept her body busy, while her heart remained hollow. She took in sewing from townfolk when she could, mended clothes for a few coins, and sometimes exchanged pies or preserves for firewood. Each task filled her hands but emptied her spirit, for there was no one waiting to share the results. No child ran to her for comfort. No husband came home with dust on his shoulders asking for supper. Each evening ended the same, with silence so loud it echoed. She kept a small garden in the back, rows of beans and potatoes, though some years the earth gave more than others. The work grounded her, and when her hands dug into the soil, she sometimes imagined her husband's voice encouraging her, "You're stronger than you know, Mary." But even the garden could not fill the absence that lingered in every corner of her home. At night, when the wind carried the distant sounds of laughter from families in town or the ringing of church bells on Sundays, Mary would sit at her window and watch the world she no longer felt part of. Once, she had dreamed of filling her house with children's laughter, of rocking babies to sleep by the fire. But the fever had taken her husband before those dreams ever had a chance to grow roots. The townsfolk pitied her. She could see it in their eyes. They would nod politely, speak kind words, but none lingered long in conversation. A widow was a reminder of life's cruel hand, and many preferred not to dwell on such things. Some whispered that she might remarry someday, but Mary had shut her heart to such talk. Love felt like a door locked from the inside, and she had misplaced the key. Still, despite the loneliness, there was a quiet resilience in her. Each morning she rose, lit her stove, and faced another day. She had not given up, though the temptation sometimes pulled at her like a heavy stone. Deep inside, a part of her still longed for connection, for family, for a place to belong again. She told herself that such dreams were behind her, that a widow had no right to expect more from life. Yet when she allowed herself to be honest, she admitted a painful truth. She did not want to be alone forever. Unbeknownst to her, the empty spaces in her heart would soon be noticed by 2 small pairs of eyes belonging to twin girls who had lost their own mother's warmth and who were bold enough to believe they might find it again in her. John Whitaker rose before dawn, as he always did. The rooster had hardly crowed when he was already pulling on his boots, tying his hat beneath his chin, and stepping out into the brisk morning air. His ranch stretched wide and wild beyond the town's edge, rolling fields, a scattering of oaks and fences that always seemed to need mending. The cattle lowed in the distance, restless and waiting for his hand to guide them. It was a ranch built not just on sweat, but on love. John and his late wife, Clara, had dreamed of raising their children there, of filling the homestead with laughter and the smells of warm bread. For a time, they had it all. Clara's smile had been the heart of their home, softening John's hard edges and filling every corner of the house with music and warmth. But when illness claimed her 4 years ago, that warmth dimmed to embers, leaving only the girls to remind him of what once was. Emma and Ella, identical in face, but different. In spirit, were just 8 years old now. Emma was the thoughtful one, often trailing behind her father with a notebook and stub of pencil, sketching birds or copying down words from old books. Ella, on the other hand, was bold and lively, climbing fences and chasing calves as if the ranch were her own private playground. Together they kept John's world turning, though they also reminded him daily of the gap Clara had left behind. Life on the ranch had not been easy since Clara's passing. John carried the work of two people now. He rose early, tended the herds, fixed what was broken, cooked meals when the girls were too tired to help, and still tucked them into bed at night. Some days, the weight of it pressed him into the ground, and he wondered how much longer he could keep it up. The girls did their best to help. Emma was handy with baking, often rolling dough with flour smudged across her cheeks, while Ella loved to help in the barn, even if her help sometimes caused more trouble than it solved. John tried to smile through the chaos, but he knew the truth. They needed more than he could give. They needed gentleness, guidance, and a steady hand to teach them the things their mother would have taught, things no rancher, no matter how willing, could replace. Still, John guarded his heart. Many in town hinted that he should remarry, that the girls deserved a mother. Some even suggested widows they thought would fit. But John stiffened at the thought. He loved Clara too much to imagine another woman stepping into her place. Even when the ache of loneliness gnawed at him in the stillness of night, he told himself he could manage. His daughters were his world, and for them he would sacrifice his own longings. Yet the girls were not blind to his struggle. They saw the shadows beneath his eyes after long days, the way he lingered by Clara's old rocking chair, or the sighs he thought they never heard. They also felt the emptiness themselves. While they had their father's strength and love, there was no mother's voice to braid their hair, no soft arms to run to when nightmares woke them, no gentle laughter to turn their house into a home again. The twins often whispered to each other about it. In the quiet of their shared room as they lay under patched quilts, they dreamed aloud of what it would be like if someone could fill that space. Not just anyone, but someone kind, someone who needed them as much as they needed her. And though John did not know it yet, his daughters' longing hearts would soon be the spark that brought change to their lives. While he braced himself to shoulder life alone forever, Emma and Ella were preparing to take matters into their own hands. The morning sun slanted through the dusty windows of the general store, casting golden beams across shelves lined with jars of molasses, bolts of cloth, and sacks of flour stacked high. Mary rarely visited town unless she had no choice. But that day her flour bin at home was nearly empty. She needed to stretch what little she had to bake bread for the week. With her shawl wrapped tight against the breeze, she pushed open the door, the bell above it chiming softly, and stepped inside. She kept her eyes down, as she usually did, not eager for lingering looks or pitying smiles. Widowhood had a way of marking a person. People didn't always know what to say to her, so most said very little. She made her way toward the counter, rehearsing in her head how few pounds of flour she could afford. It was then she noticed them, two small girls with braids tumbling over their shoulders, straining together to lift a sack of flour nearly as heavy as they were. They tugged at it, their little boots skidding on the wooden floor, faces flushed with determination. One twin pushed while the other pulled, their giggles breaking into frustrated sighs when the sack refused to budge. Mary hesitated, watching them for a moment. Something in the sight tugged at her heart. Perhaps because once she had dreamed of children just like them, working alongside her. Before she could stop herself, she stepped forward. "Here now?" she said gently, crouching beside them. "That bag's far too heavy for the two of you. Let me help." The girls looked up in unison, identical pairs of wide brown eyes locking with hers. Mary felt a strange flutter in her chest at their gaze. There was no hesitation, no wariness, only open curiosity, as though they had been waiting for her all along. With practiced hands, Mary lifted the sack easily onto her hip, carrying it to the counter as the girls followed close behind. "There," she said with a small smile. "No need to strain yourselves." "Thank you, ma'am," the quieter of the two whispered. She clutched the hem of her dress, shy but sincere. The other girl, bolder and more outspoken, grinned up at her. "You're strong," she declared, "stronger than most men we know." Mary let out a soft laugh, something she hadn't done in a long while. "Perhaps. But sometimes strength is just knowing when to ask for help," the storekeeper chuckled from behind the counter. "John Whitaker's girls," he said, nodding toward them. "Always trying to carry more than their share. Their pa will be in shortly." At the mention of their father, the twins exchanged a quick glance, then looked back at Mary, their eyes lingering as though they wanted to say something more. But before they could, the door opened, and a tall figure filled the frame. John Whitaker stepped inside, broad-shouldered and weathered by sun and work. His gaze landed on his daughters first, then shifted to Mary. Recognition flickered in his eyes, not from personal acquaintance but from the way small towns carried every story. He knew of her, the widow on the edge of town. Mary's cheeks flushed, faintly under his steady look. She offered a polite nod, then busied herself with her own purchase. She did not linger, and when her flour was weighed and wrapped, she slipped out quietly. But as she walked down the street toward her little cabin, she couldn't shake the memory of those girls' eyes, bright, hopeful, and oddly knowing. She told herself it was nothing, just the innocent curiosity of children. Yet deep inside something stirred, a warmth she thought had long gone cold. And for Emma and Ella, it was not a simple meeting at all. As they watched her walk away, they whispered to each other, their voices low but full of conviction. A few days after the encounter at the general store, Mary was sweeping the dirt from her cabin's porch. The September air was crisp, and the dry leaves rustled as they tumbled across the ground. She thought the day would pass quietly, like most did. Just her chores, and the whisper of wind in the trees. But then, in the distance, she heard giggles. Light, musical, and unmistakably childlike. She paused, broom in hand, and peered down the path. Two small figures approached, braids bouncing with each step, skirts swishing around their boots. Emma and Ella Whitaker, her brow furrowed in surprise. Why would the rancher's daughters be wandering so far from their homestead? She set the broom aside and stepped down from the porch, meeting them halfway. "Girls?" she called gently. "What brings you out here?" Ella, the bolder of the two, marched right up and placed a basket in Mary's hands. Inside were wildflowers, clumsily arranged but vibrant, with a few berries tucked between the stems. "These are for you," she announced, her chin tilted proudly. Mary blinked down at the gift, her heart tugged by the simple kindness. "For me? That's very sweet of you. Did your papa send you?" Emma shook her head quickly, her braids brushing her cheeks. "No, ma'am, we came on our own." Mary opened her mouth to scold them gently. It wasn't safe for two young girls to wander so far alone. But before she could, Ella spoke again, her words startling in their boldness. "We need a mama," she said plainly, looking Mary straight in the eye. "And you need a home." The world seemed to go quiet. Mary froze, her breath catching as the words sank in. She searched their faces, expecting mischief or a joke, but instead found only sincerity. Emma's eyes brimmed with shyness, but even she nodded faintly, backing her sister's declaration. "What?" Mary whispered, clutching the basket closer to her chest. "Girls, that's not something—" "You're kind," Emma interrupted softly, her voice barely above a whisper. You helped us at the store. You smiled at us like Mama used to. We like you." Mary's throat tightened. She felt her heart squeeze painfully at the comparison. Their innocent words carried more weight than they could ever understand. She wanted to tell them they were mistaken, that she wasn't strong enough, that she had nothing to offer. Yet looking at their hopeful faces, she found she couldn't. Instead, she sank onto the porch step, motioning for them to sit beside her. They plopped down eagerly, skirts billowing. "Girls," she began gently, searching for the right words. "Your papa, he loves you very much, and I'm sure he takes very good care of you." "He does," Ella admitted quickly. "But he's lonely, we can tell. And so are you." Mary swallowed hard, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. Children had a way of piercing straight through walls adults built around themselves. She hadn't thought anyone noticed her loneliness, certainly not two little girls. "I don't think your papa would approve of you saying such things," she managed at last, her voice trembling with equal parts laughter and tears. Emma leaned closer, her small hand brushing against Mary's. "Maybe. But sometimes papas don't see what's best. Sometimes children do." For a long moment, Mary sat in silence, caught between disbelief and the strange warmth their presence stirred inside her. She wanted to protest, to remind them she was just a widow trying to survive. But part of her, deep, hidden, and long denied, whispered that maybe, just maybe, these girls weren't wrong. When they finally left, skipping back down the path, Mary remained on the porch long after, clutching the basket of flowers to her chest. Their words echoed in her mind, soft but insistent. "We need a mama, and you need a home." John Whitaker noticed right away when his daughters came skipping up the path that afternoon, their cheeks flushed, their braids tangled by the wind, and a basket no longer full of flowers swinging between them. He was in the yard, mending a section of fence that had given way under last week's storm. At the sight of their wide grins, he narrowed his eyes. He knew that look all too well. It was the look of mischief, or at least a secret they weren't ready to share. "Where have you been?" he asked, setting aside his hammer. His voice was calm but firm, the voice of a father who expected straight answers. "Walking," Ella said quickly, dusting her hands against her dress. "Just walking," Emma echoed, though her eyes darted to her sisters, betraying the fib. John frowned. He knew better than to press too hard. The girls had a way of closing up like clams when he did. Still, something about the wildflowers stuck in their braids made him uneasy. "You weren't near the river, were you?" he asked, his brow creasing. "I've told you it's too dangerous to wander there alone." "No, Papa," Ella said, her tone almost sing-song, too innocent to be believable. John exhaled, shaking his head. They were hiding something. He could feel it in his bones, the way a rancher could sense a storm before it broke. That evening, as the girls helped set the table for supper, he caught snippets of their whispered conversation. "She smiled," Emma said in a hushed tone, and Ella replied, "I told you she'd be perfect." John froze mid-step, the spoon in his hand pausing in mid-air. His jaw tightened. She? Perfect? He didn't like the sound of that. When they sat down to eat, he decided to test the waters. "So," he began casually, spooning stew into his bowl, "who did you girls visit today?" Two pairs of wide brown eyes snapped up to his face. Silence. Then Ella blurted, "We didn't do anything wrong." Which was, of course, all the proof John needed that they had. "Girls," he said, his voice even, though a flicker of worry stirred in his chest. "I want the truth." Emma's lower lip trembled before she finally confessed. "We went to see the widow, the one who helped us at the store." John set down his spoon. A dozen thoughts ran through his head at once. Mary. He'd seen her, Once or twice in town, quiet and reserved, keeping to herself. He knew her story, as most did. A widow, living alone on the edge of town. He hadn't expected his daughters to take notice of her, much less seek her out. You went all the way. Out to her place? His tone was sharper now, edged with both fear and frustration. Without telling me? She was kind, Emma whispered, almost pleading. And she's lonely. We thought... Ella leaned forward, eyes blazing with conviction. We thought she could be our mama. The words hit John like a hammer to the chest. For a moment, he was speechless. He looked at his daughters, so earnest, so certain, and felt the ground shift beneath him. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He wanted to scold them, to remind them that life didn't work like that a mother couldn't be chosen, like a new doll or a favorite pie. But another part of him, the part that still woke at night reaching for a wife who was no longer there, couldn't ignore the truth behind their words. Mary had been kind. He'd seen it himself at the store. The way she helped his girls without hesitation, the way her laugh had softened something in her eyes. He hadn't let himself dwell on it then, but now, sitting at the table with his daughters staring at him expectantly, the thought lodged firmly in his chest. Still, he forced himself to speak firmly. That's not for little girls to decide, he said, though his voice lacked the steel he wished it carried. And you're not to bother Mrs. Mary again, do you understand? The twins nodded, but reluctantly, their faces falling. Supper continued in silence, though John found no appetite. Later that night, after the girls had gone to bed, he sat by the dying fire, staring into the embers. His daughter's words echoed in his mind. We thought she could be our mama. John rubbed a hand over his face. He didn't know what unsettled him more, the boldness of their wish, or the fact that deep down, a part of him wondered if they might be right. That night, Mary lay awake long after the fire in her hearth had burned low. The basket of wildflowers from the twins sat on the table, their petals beginning to wilt but still carrying the faint sweetness of the meadow. She had meant to put them in water, but every time she looked at them, her chest tightened, and she set the task aside. Their innocent gift was too heavy with meaning. The girl's words echoed in her ears like a hymn she could not escape. We need a mama, and you need a home. She had smiled at them, even laughed a little. But once they were gone, her laughter crumbled into tears. They didn't understand, she told herself. They couldn't. Children saw the world in simple lines. Lonely woman, lonely family. Put them together, problem solved. But life was not that tidy. Hearts were fragile things, and hers had already been broken once. As she turned restlessly beneath her quilt, memories of her late husband drifted in. His hand brushing her cheek, his laugh echoing in the cabin, the warmth of his arms holding, her steady. Losing him had torn a hole so wide she had thought nothing could ever fill it. Could she dare open herself to another life, another family? And what if she failed them? Her thoughts turned to the rancher, John Whitaker. She had caught his eyes on her once at the store, steady and unreadable. She had heard whispers of him in town, how he was a good man, honest, hard-working, devoted, to his land and his girls, a man who had suffered loss of his own. They were not so different, she realized, two souls marked by grief, carrying on because they had no choice. But it was precisely that likeness that frightened her. She had lived with the ache of absence for 2 long years. Could she truly step into another man's home, carrying the ghost of his wife beside her every day? Could she raise daughters who might always compare her to the mother they lost? She rose from her bed and moved quietly to the table, pulling out her sewing basket. When she was troubled, she stitched. It steadied her hands and gave her something tangible to hold when her thoughts spiraled. But even as her needle moved in and out of the fabric, her mind refused to quiet. The truth she had tried to bury rose to the surface. She was lonely, desperately lonely. Her cabin echoed with silence, and her heart ached for laughter, for the warmth of little arms around her neck, for the kind of home she had once dreamed of building. She wanted what those girls had offered her in their childlike boldness, a place to belong and people to belong to. And yet, fear held her back. Fear of rejection, of walking into their lives only to be cast out when she didn't fit. Fear of opening her heart again, only to watch it shatter a second time. Perhaps it was safer to remain in her quiet solitude, even if it meant her days stretched out empty before her. She pressed her palm against her chest, whispering a prayer into the silence. Lord, show me what to do. If this is your will, give me the courage. If not, guard my heart from hope. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faintest sound, laughter, drifting across the distance from the Whitaker ranch. Mary closed her eyes, and for one fleeting moment, she imagined what it would feel like to be the reason for that laughter, to sit at a table not alone but surrounded by family. Her tears fell silently, soaking into the fabric in her lap. She did not yet know what her choice would be, but the seed of longing had been planted, and no matter how she tried, she could not pull it free. The storm rolled in without warning, sweeping across the plains with a fury that rattled windows and bent trees low to the ground. Rain lashed against Mary's cabin, drumming so hard on the roof that it drowned out every other sound. She sat by the fire, her mending basket at her feet, watching the flames flicker and dance. Though storms always made her uneasy, this one carried a deeper weight. Something inside her urged her to look beyond her own four walls, to wonder how the Whitaker ranch was faring under the battering skies. By morning, the rain had passed, but its destruction was plain. The earth outside was muddy and strewn with broken branches. From her porch, Mary could see fence posts splintered and a few shingles torn from her roof. She sighed, gathering her shawl tighter. Then she noticed movement in the distance. Two small figures trudging up the path toward town, carrying what looked like a bundle of supplies between them. Even from afar, she recognized the Whitaker twins. Her heart lurched. What were John's daughters doing out in the mud, burdened with more than their little arms could carry? Without a second thought, she stepped off her porch and hurried to meet them. "Emma? Ella?" she called, her boots sinking into the wet ground. "What on earth are you doing out here?" The girls turned, startled but relieved at the sight of her. Ella, panting from the weight of the bundle, explained, "Papa's fixing the fences. They broke in the storm. We're bringing him tools and rope, but it's heavy." Mary's eyes softened as she took the bundle from them with ease. "Too heavy for the two of you," she said gently. "Come, I'll walk with you." The girls fell into step beside her, chattering as they went. They told her about the storm, how the cattle had broken through a section of fence, how their papa had worked all night trying to keep the herd from scattering. Mary listened, her heart twisting at the thought of John battling the storm alone, exhaustion weighing on him as much as the rain. When they reached the ranch, the sight confirmed the girls' words. The fields were littered with debris, the fence sagged in places, and John stood in the mud, sleeves rolled up, hammer in hand, his face drawn with fatigue. He looked up as Mary approached, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Mrs. Mary," he said, setting down the hammer. "I didn't expect—" "She helped us carry the bundle," Ella interrupted proudly. Mary offered a small, steady smile. "I thought you might need more than that." Before he could protest, she was already moving toward the house, where she found the kitchen in disarray, dishes unwashed, the stove cold, the girls' attempts at tidying abandoned in the rush of the morning. Mary rolled up her sleeves and set to work. She baked biscuits with the last of her flour, heated broth, and set the table as if it were the most natural thing in the world. By the time John came in from the fields, the smell of warm bread filled. The heir and his daughters were seated eagerly at the table. For a moment he paused in the doorway, watching. The scene tugged at something deep inside him, a memory of days when Clara's presence had filled the home with the same kind of warmth. "You didn't have to," he said gruffly, though his voice lacked conviction. Mary looked up at him, her eyes calm but kind. "I know, but sometimes help is needed, whether we admit it or not." He said nothing more, only nodded. But as he took his seat and watched his girls laugh over supper, a quiet gratitude filled the silence between them. That night, as Mary walked back to her cabin, she realized something had shifted. For the first time in years, she had felt useful beyond herself, not just surviving, but giving. And in the Whitaker home, though she didn't yet know it, her presence had begun to feel like the missing piece they hadn't dared hope for. The morning after the storm, the Whitaker ranch was alive with sounds of repair. Hammer strikes rang. Through the air, the lowing of cattle echoed across the fields, and the muddy ground bore the footprints of hard work. Yet inside the house, for the first time in years, a new kind of sound mingled with the familiar rhythms. Laughter. Mary stood at the stove, apron tied loosely around her waist, flipping biscuits onto a plate as the twins sat at the table, swinging their legs and chattering. Emma was carefully braiding her sister's hair, tongue between her teeth in concentration, while Ella wriggled and teased, complaining the braid was too tight. Their playful banter made Mary smile, her heart lifting with each sound. John entered, quietly, pausing in the doorway. His eyes swept over the scene, the tidy kitchen, the smell of warm food, his daughters laughing in a way he hadn't heard in too long. For a moment, he didn't move, afraid the smallest step would break the fragile spell. Mary glanced over her shoulder and caught his gaze. For a heartbeat, neither spoke, but something unspoken passed between them, soft and uncertain. "You've done too much," John said at last, clearing his throat. "I didn't mean for you to—" Mary cut him off gently, setting the plate of biscuits on the table. "It was no trouble. Besides, I enjoy keeping busy." The twins exchanged a quick smile, their eyes darting between the two adults. Even at their young age, they sensed the change in the air, a warmth that hadn't been there before. Breakfast was simple, biscuits, eggs, and leftover stew, but it felt like a feast. The girls chattered endlessly, telling Mary stories of their adventures on the ranch, the time Ella had chased a calf and ended up face first in the mud, or how Emma once tried to write a book about prairie birds. Mary listened with genuine delight, asking questions and laughing until her eyes sparkled. John, though quieter, found himself watching her more than he meant to. He noticed how naturally she leaned toward the girls, how patient she was when Ella interrupted, how tender her smile grew when Emma shyly shared her sketches. It was as if she had always belonged at that table, filling the spaces Clara's absence had left. Later, when the girls ran outside to play, John lingered in the kitchen. As Mary cleared the dishes, "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice low but sincere. "You don't need to," she replied, rinsing a plate. Then, after a pause, she added softly, "It feels good to be useful again, to be part of something more than just my own little cabin." Her words struck him. He wanted to tell her she was more than useful, that her presence had already brought light into their home, but the words caught in his throat. He had lived with grief for so long that opening his heart again felt dangerous, almost disloyal. Still, the walls around him were beginning to crack, and he knew it. Mary, too, felt her defenses weakening. Every smile from the girls, every quiet glance from John, chipped away at the fear she had carried for years. She wasn't just surviving when she was with them. She was living, breathing in a way she hadn't thought possible anymore. That evening, when she finally returned to her own cabin, the silence felt sharper than usual, almost unbearable. She sat by the fire, staring into the flames, and realized how quickly the Whitaker home had started to feel more alive than her own. In both their hearts, Mary's and John's, the truth was slowly becoming undeniable. The barriers they had, built out of loss and fear, were beginning to fall, not with grand gestures or spoken promises, but with simple moments of kindness, shared meals, and laughter that stitched itself back into their lives. For weeks after the storm, Mary's visits to the Whitaker ranch became more frequent. At first, she told herself it was only neighborly, helping the girls with their lessons, bringing over pies when she baked, or stitching up torn shirts for John. But each time she returned home to her lonely cabin, the silence pressed harder, and each time she returned to the ranch, she felt the ache in her heart soften. The girls grew attached quickly, slipping their hands into hers without hesitation, climbing into her lap with their stories, asking her to braid their hair or tuck them in when John was late with chores. Mary tried to guard her heart, but she could feel herself falling, not just for them, but for the family she never thought she would have again. It was then the whispers began. Small towns always had a way of filling silence with gossip, and Mary had lived long enough to know that once tongues started wagging, they rarely stopped. At the mercantile, she heard it in the lowered voices behind her back. At church, she felt it in the glances that lingered too long. "She's after his land," someone muttered one afternoon as Mary passed. "Imagine throwing herself at a man just because she can't bear to be alone," another replied. "Poor John, he deserves better than a woman clinging to his charity." The words stung like thorns. Mary hurried out, her face hot with shame. But no matter how quickly she walked, she couldn't outrun the accusations. Each whisper dug deeper into the doubts already gnawing at her heart. That night, she sat by her fire, hands trembling as she mended a torn shirt John had left with her. For the first time since she'd dared to hope again, she wondered if she was a fool. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps she was only reaching for what wasn't hers to take. John hadn't asked her to stay, after all. It had been the girls who drew her in, not him. What if he only tolerated her presence for their sake? The next day, her steps felt heavy as she walked to the ranch. When she saw the girls racing to greet her, their joy unguarded, the ache inside her only deepened. How could she let herself love them when she might have to walk away? At supper that evening, Mary grew quiet. The girls noticed first, glancing at each other, then at her. Finally, Ella blurted, "Are you mad at us?" Mary shook her head, forcing a smile. "No, darling, not at all." "Then why are you sad?" Emma asked softly. Mary's throat tightened. She wanted to brush the question away, but the truth pressed too heavily. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "Because I don't belong here. People are saying things that make me wonder if I should stay away." The girls' faces fell, their eyes wide with alarm. In an instant, they were at her side, clinging to her arms, shaking their heads fiercely. "No!" Ella cried. "Don't go. You do belong here," Emma pleaded, her small voice breaking. "You're our mama now. You can't leave us." Mary's heart cracked wide open. She hugged them tightly, tears slipping down her cheeks, torn between the cruel weight of gossip and the pure truth of the children's love. John, who had been silent through it all, finally pushed back his chair. His jaw was set, his eyes burning, with something fierce. He looked at Mary, then at his daughters, and in that moment, a decision formed in his heart. He would not allow her to be driven away by whispers. He would not let fear or pride steal from his daughters the mother they longed for, or from himself the chance at a home made whole again. The test of Mary's heart had come, and she had nearly faltered. But now, John knew, it was his turn to stand. The tension in the Whitaker home lingered long after Mary confessed her fears. Though the girls clung to her tighter than ever, she still moved carefully, afraid that one day John might quietly ask her to step back. She told herself she would endure it for the girls' sake, but inside, her heart ached with uncertainty. John, however, had made his choice. He could no longer sit back and allow the gossiping tongues of the town, or his own hesitations, to dictate the course of their lives. That evening, after the girls had gone to bed, he found Mary sitting on the porch, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The night was cool, stars scattered like lanterns across the sky, and the sound of crickets filled the silence. John stood there for a long moment, as if gathering courage, then lowered himself onto the step beside her. "You've heard the talk," he began, his voice steady but weighted. "I know what people are saying, that you don't belong here, that I should keep to myself for the girls' sake. But Mary—" He paused, turning to meet her eyes, his gaze clear and unwavering. "The only people who say matters are sitting under this roof, and my daughters have already made theirs plain." Mary swallowed hard, her breath catching. "John, I never wanted to bring shame to you, or to them. I only—" He reached for her hand, calloused fingers closing around hers. "You've brought nothing but good into this house. For the first time since Clara passed, I've seen my girls laugh like children again. I've seen this place feel alive. That's not shame, Mary. That's grace." Her eyes filled with tears, though this time they weren't born of fear. "And you?" she whispered. "What about you, John? Do you truly want me here, or only for the girls?" The question hung in the air like a fragile thread. He could have spoken around it, offered some practical answer about help or necessity. But John had never been a man for half-truths. He tightened his grip on her hand. "I want you here because you make this house a home again," he said, his voice low but certain. "Not just for Emma and Ella. For me, too." The tears slipped free, and Mary pressed her hand to her mouth, overcome. She had dreamed of belonging again, of being needed, but she had never dared believe it could be real. The door creaked softly behind them. Two small figures padded out, their hair rumpled from bed. Emma climbed into Mary's lap, while Ella leaned sleepily against her father. "We couldn't sleep," Emma mumbled. "Were you talking about Mama?" Mary froze, her breath hitching, but John only smiled and pulled his daughter close. "Yes, sweetheart," he said. "We were talking about your Mama." The girls' faces lit up as if the stars themselves had landed in their eyes. Emma wrapped her arms around Mary's neck, while Ella nestled against her side. And in that moment, with the twins holding tight, John watching with quiet devotion, Mary felt something she hadn't in years: whole. From that day forward, the whispers of the town no longer mattered. The Whitaker ranch carried on, not untouched by hardship, but steadied by love. Neighbors who once gossiped began to see instead the strength of a family rebuilt, the kindness of a widow who had found her place, and the resilience of a man and his daughters who had learned to open their hearts again. Mary moved her few belongings into the ranch house, her cabin left behind but not forgotten, a reminder of where she had come from. The girls delighted in showing her every corner of their world, teaching her how to feed the chickens, laughing as she learned to ride with them across the pasture, insisting she sit beside them every night for bedtime prayers. And John, though still a man of quiet words, let his actions speak. The extra chair he built for her by the fire, the small garden plot he helped her tend, the steady way his eyes sought hers across the table each evening. The lonely widow had found her home, not by chance, but by love that grew slowly, tenderly, until it could no longer be denied. And the rancher's twin girls, who once whispered their desperate plea, "We need a mama and you need a home," had seen their prayer answered in the most beautiful way.